All right. Hey, good morning. Could you do me a big old favor? We've got some people standing up in the back. Could you move to the left and free up some space on the aisle seat? That would be beautiful, and we can get these folks who are waiting to get in. That'd be great. Yeah, we just added on. What are we going to go to phase 3 now? What is? Yeah, yeah. So my left, your right. Go that way. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. Hey, while they're coming in, I want to tell you something really cool. We baptized 61 people last week. Isn't that amazing? Yes, it was so incredible. I mean, I got a good bicep workout, and just hearing all the stories of husbands and wives getting baptized, and fathers and sons. The gentleman, if you're here at 11, we had somebody who was at home watching it online, and God's like, get your clothes on and get to church and get baptized. And he obeyed and came here, and he got baptized, and just cool stories like that. And if you were baptized last week, I just want to tell you, we are, the folks sitting around you, our staff, our church, we're praying for you, because I know, because I've been where you are, that when you take that step of faith, Satan hates it. And as soon as you get home, he starts making you doubt, oh, that wasn't real. That was just some emotional decision. And you start having those doubts. And so we're praying, because you're in a spiritual battle right now, but it was real. And you made a step of faith, and you made a step of obedience. And it was hopefully the first of many steps of obedience. And God's going to use that decision in the days to come. So we're excited about it. So we've got a series coming up called, there it is, Christmas Open House. So we're starting a brand new series today, and I'll tell you about it in just a second. But in December, we're starting this series called Christmas Open House. And what we wanted to do, it kind of looks rough from the road out there. It looks like maybe we're not even open for business yet. And so we wanted to say to our community, to your friends who don't attend church anywhere, hey, we're open. We would love for you to come, check out the building, see what God's doing here at Generations Church. So I hope that you'll take this opportunity. We'll tell you more about it in the next few weeks, but take this opportunity to invite a friend to come to Generations Church. Maybe we need to start a third service. I don't know, but we'll figure out the space thing. We just want to keep reaching people with the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that's our vision. And so this is going to be a fun series. We're going to have food out in the lobby, and we're going to have some great Christmas music, and we're going to take a tour of Nazareth, just like an open house. We're taking a tour of Nazareth, a tour of Bethlehem, tour of all those things. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, one of the things that we've done the last few years, if you've been here, is we take the month of November to take a look at an Old Testament character. Sam I Am, you might remember that series. That was Samuel, David, Jonah. It's just fun, because I'm probably heavier in the New Testament in my preaching for obvious reasons. We get to see the gospel there, but I love the Old Testament. And so we try to take an opportunity a few times a year to study an Old Testament book or an Old Testament character. In November, we're studying an Old Testament character. Well, this November, we're studying the book of, and it has several characters in it, the book of Ruth. And it's such a cool book, because it's a love story, but it's got death and redemption and tragedy and victory. And you've got characters like Ruth and Boaz and Naomi and all that. And we're going to meet some of those characters today. But it's a cool book, and I'm glad you're here. Now, the book begins with a simple sentence. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel. Now, let me give you a little background on that. When the judges ruled, this was the book of Judges, if you're looking for a place in the Old Testament. But it was a period of about 400 years, from about 1400 BC to about 1000 BC. If you're thinking about people you've heard of maybe in the Bible, it's from when Joshua, who was Moses' replacement, basically took the people into the promised land. The people of Israel, when they left Egypt, went to the promised land. That was Joshua. So from the time of Joshua to the time of King Saul, who was the first king of Israel. It's about a 400-year period. And I'm going to tell you, this was a dark period in the history of Israel. This was a period when, there was murder and brutality and rape. And I've said before that if Judges were a movie, it would be rated X. It would be mature audiences only because it's got that kind of graphic. It's a powerful book. You see the hand of God, but it's also a book that's, wow, it just blows you away. The Bible is not boring. If somebody told you the Bible is boring, they've never read the Bible. You should read the Bible. It's amazing. So the book of Ruth happened during this period of the Judges. And during this dark period, it's one of the bright spots. Not chapter 1, which we'll cover today. It's one of the most depressing books in the Bible, or chapters in the Bible. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Now, there's some bright spots in it, but it's pretty rough. So let's jump in. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So the people, it's kind of ironic, and there's a lot of irony in Ruth, because they're starting in Bethlehem. This is where the story begins. And Bethlehem means house of bread, but there's no bread in the house of bread. Now, what was the famine, the judgment of God? I would say probably so, because one of the things that you see in Judges, if you've never read it, look for this when you read it. There's a cycle that happens in the book of Judges. So the people are obedient to God, and they begin that way under Joshua. And then God blesses them for their obedience, and they're prosperous. But you know what happens sometimes when we're prosperous, don't you? We get apathetic. And they began to be apathetic, and they began to reject God and worship idols. And so the judgment of God came. And then they were sorry. They repented of their sin. God delivered them. He blessed them. Then the cycle begins again. Apathetic, judgment, all that sort of thing. And you see this repeat in Judges like 4 or 5 different times. Well, we happen to be in one of those times when the judgment of God is on the nation of Israel because of their disobedience, and there was a famine in the land. Well, there was one man who was tired of being hungry and decided to do something about it. So a man from Bethlehem in Judea left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and his 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. Now let's talk about their names, because when you read a name in the Old Testament, the name is significant. People didn't name their kids things by accident. They had a purpose behind naming them. It wasn't just like, oh, Chilion, that's a cool name. Now there was a reason behind it. So let's talk about this guy first of all, Elimelech. Oh, well, let me finish reading the verse. They were Ephraimites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. Okay, got the verse. Now, Elimelech, my God is king. That's what his name means, which again, a little bit of irony here, because you could almost interpret Elimelech's actions as being the opposite of my God is king because of what he did, moving his family from Israel to Moab. Now, I get it. I understand why he did it. Like when you look at the hungry faces of your kids, you're like, I got to feed my family. But understand this. Him moving from Bethlehem in Israel to Moab was not a spiritually neutral decision. No decisions that we ever make, especially when it comes to a new job or moving our family somewhere, these are not spiritually neutral decisions. As a matter of fact, I have conversations sometimes with some of you in the lobby who are like, we checked out Generations Church online before we moved to this area. We wanted to make sure there was a church we could get connected to, we could grow in. Anytime you move, not a spiritually neutral decision. And it certainly wasn't with this one, because Elimelech's coming from Israel, from Bethlehem, from Judea, where the people of God are, the synagogue, the Torah, the fellowship of fellow Israelites there, and he's moving them to this place called Moab. Now, Moab has a bad history. So if you've ever read Genesis, there's this guy named Lot who fled Sodom and Gomorrah. You've probably heard of those cities. Even if you haven't read the Bible, that's where God destroyed these cities for their sin. And Lot and his family fled the city, and God said, don't look back. Well, Lot's wife looked back and she turned to stone. Well, this is where it gets weird. So Lot and his daughters were all that were left, and they're like, well, there's no men around, so they got their dad drunk and they slept with him. Yeah. That's how Moab began. They're the descendants of Lot, the people of Moab. So they have this reputation as a people of incest. It was part of their false worship to their god Chemosh, was part of their sexual rites and all their things that they did. So this was just kind of a messed up people. So Elimelech is taking his family, again, not a spiritually neutral decision, taking his family from Israel to this place in Moab. And it's not good. And besides, God commanded the Israelites not to dwell with the Moabites for all these reasons. So he's breaking a direct command of God. After he gets there, soon after, he would die. But more about that later. He was married to a woman named Naomi. Her name means sweet or pleasant. Now, maybe she was when they got married, and she will be by the time we get to Ruth chapter 4. But for most of our story, she's more like bitter and sassy, is really kind of how she lived. Again, a little bit of irony. Now, last two, the sons' names, Mahlon and Chilion, seriously, their names mean sick and dying. We're not exactly sure why, but it's possible that they were born during this famine, and so maybe they were just scrawny little kids. They looked like they were sick and dying, so their parents named them that. I don't know. But it's just a kind of a lesson for us. If your child is born during the pandemic, please don't name them COVID-19. That would be a bad choice of name. Here's my two sons, COVID and Asian bird flu, or something. That would just be a bad idea. So you got the family, all right? We understand they're moving from Bethlehem. It's about 50 miles away to Moab, excuse me, but it's not an easy journey. They have to go over the Jordan River or go south of the Dead Sea, moving away. And like I said, soon after they got there, things really went south. In other words, here's what happened. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her sons, the two sons. The two sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, oh goodness, it gets worse. Both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her two sons or her husband. Elimelech moved his family there to save their lives, and in the process he died, and his two sons died. So here's Naomi, an Israelite in a foreign land. She has these two Moabite daughter-in-laws, and we're 5 verses in, and it's just this horrible thing. I mean, things seem desperate. Like, what in the world's going to happen? But now, in verse 6, God hasn't been mentioned in the book at all. In verse 6, God's name is mentioned for the first time. And where the Lord is, there is a hope and a future. All right, here we go. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So the famine's over. The Israelites are prospering again. They probably repented of their sins. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her two daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living. They took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, she begins to have second thoughts. So these girls, they're married to Israelite men, so they kind of take up that identity. We're Israelites now. We're going to go with our mother-in-law back to Israel. But Naomi's having second thoughts. She said to her two daughters-in-law, go back to your mother's home, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. So she really kind of begins speaking a blessing over them, praying for them, if you will. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. So Naomi realizes, look, I need you with me, but you're really better off without me, because this is a male-dominated society, agrarian. They needed to marry a man who could work the land and provide for them and all those kind of things. And this is just a sad scene to me. I mean, here are these women, everything they own is in this caravan heading back to Israel. And they're pulling over beside the road and they're just weeping, hugging each other and crying. And just your heart breaks for Naomi because of where she is. She's basically alone except for these two Moabite daughters-in-law. And she's like, y'all leave and go back to your parents and I'll just figure it out. It's just a sad, sad scene. They argued with her. We're not going back. No, they said, we want to go with you to your people. Whether that was sincere or not, who knows? But they're like, no. But Naomi replied, why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? So let me pause here a second because you have to understand this culture. So part of the culture, and this is part of the Mosaic law, this is part of what God commanded them, is that if you have a husband who's married to his wife and the husband dies, well, his younger brother was required to marry his now dead brother's wife, his sister-in-law, so that they could have children, and their oldest son would take the name of the dead brother, and he would have all the rights of the dead brother, which was property rights, so he could carry on his brother's name and his brother's estate. So it sounds kind of weird to us, like you're thinking, marry my sister-in-law. But this was part of their culture. It was God's way of providing for the widows. And so you're thinking, well, what if they don't want to marry their sister-in-law, like their older brother's, now widow? Well, God makes a provision for that. Matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I thought I would just read it to you because let's just, think in your mind, okay, older brother died, younger brother's supposed to marry the widow, and he's like, no, I didn't like his choice when he made it. I ain't marrying him. So what happens then? Well, God talks about it in Deuteronomy 25. But if the man refuses to marry his brother's widow, she must go to the town gate and say to the elders assembled there, my husband's brother refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. Like announcing it to the town gate, all where the people gather. He refuses to fulfill the duties of a brother-in-law by marrying me. And I look good too. What's wrong with him? She didn't say that, but the elders of the town will then summon him and talk with him. And now you got to think this is public humiliation. So probably most of the time he would succumb and he'd be like, okay, I'll marry her. But if he refuses and says, I don't want to marry her, the widow must walk over to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal from his foot, and spit in his face. Then she must declare, this is what happens to a man who refuses to provide for his brothers with children, his brother with children. Ever afterward in Israel, his family would be referred to as the family of the man whose sandal was pulled off. How about that? Better behave yourself. So it's funny, but it's really, here's what it is. It's God taking care of widows and orphans. And you see this throughout the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. God is always looking out for the least of these. And in that society, that's, they needed to take care of them. So let's go back to Naomi. So they're having this discussion. No, we're going to stay with you. You need us, da, 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 da. And then we come to this. So no, my daughters, return to your parents' home, for I'm too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second. So she's basically saying, look, are you going to change their diapers? Wait for, like if I even had a prospect, even had a husband, had children, are you going to change their diapers and then, marry them later? I mean, I know you're Moabites, but that's kind of weird, okay? It's like, you wouldn't do that. And then listen to this, because now we get a glimpse of Naomi's theology. We get a glimpse of how she views herself. And maybe some of you view yourself this way. And I hope today you can find some freedom from this. Here's what she says. No, my daughters, things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. You know what she's saying in a subtle way? Go back to your own homes. Don't stay with me because God is against me, because the Lord is not for me. God is against me. I'm snake bit. I'm cursed. You don't want to be around me. And one of the daughter-in-laws, Orpah, is like, yeah, you are kind of snake bit. Verse 14, and again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. And Orpah left her. She went back to her people and her family. And that's the last in the Bible that we ever hear from Orpah. Now we know from biblical archaeology that Orpah went back to Moab. She began a daytime talk show and then a media. Oh wait, wrong one. That's Oprah. No, we don't know what happened to Orpah. But listen, check this out. This next verse is so good. So Orpah left, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. Oh, I just want you to stare at that one a second. I know, Naomi, you can't see it right now. You're staring at everything that you've lost, and you've lost a lot. But what you don't realize, and you're about to realize, that this woman clinging tightly to you, she's better than two sons. She's a woman who is so faithful and who's so God's going to use in such a powerful way that Naomi, even though you consider yourself cursed, one day you're going to consider yourself blessed because she won't let go of you. Then Naomi says something so disturbing. Matter of fact, I think it's the only time in the Bible, it's the only time I know of in the Bible where the children of God, a child of God practices anti-evangelism. She says to her, trying to talk her out of it, look, Naomi said to her, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same. Okay, shut up, Naomi. You've talked enough. All right, let's see what Ruth has to say. Now, Ruth will talk in verse 16 for the first time. And I'm telling you, these are famous words. These are powerful words. As a matter of fact, every wedding that I do, I read the words that I'm about to speak. And I'm talking about a husband and a wife. This is a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law. But if we could do what I'm about to read, every marriage could do it in America, we would solve all the problems in America overnight. These are so powerful. You ready for this? But Ruth replied, Naomi, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. Boom! How's that for a daughter-in-law? I mean, what powerful words that you can't do anything to run me off. And Naomi's like, okay. I mean, but here's what I want you to see. Don't miss this. It's so powerful. The issue here is not Israelite and Moabite, or I feel sorry for my crazy mother-in-law and I'm going to stay with her. And that's not it at all. The issue here is the worship of God. Now, Naomi, you're like Ruth saying, Naomi, you're the only God follower I know. And you're leaving town. I'm not leaving without you. It's like Ruth came to a fork in the road and she's like, excuse me, do I go back to Chemosh and to false idols and to false gods, or I've tasted Yahweh? And my mother-in-law, she's kind of, excuse me, she's kind of whacked right now, but I've tasted the goodness of the Lord, and I'm not going back to false idols. This is, again, I just want you to see, this is Ruth's conversion experience. She's at a fork in the road, and she's choosing Yahweh. She's choosing God. I want you to think about her act of faith for a minute. The Hebrews weren't necessarily crazy about the Moabites, obviously. I mean, their history, where they came from, their worshiping false gods. They fought battles against them. The Moabites were evil to them. So here's the way I think about it. This is the equivalent of a young black woman in growing up in Mississippi in the 1960s who basically says, she says, I don't have a Christian church in my neighborhood, in my segregated neighborhood, but there's a Christian church in the white neighborhood. And I'm going to walk to the white neighborhood and I'm going to attend the all-white church. And they may not like me, but I love their God. And I'm going to go worship their God. Same idea here. She's got no job, no husband, little food, little prospects. There's a language barrier. There's different customs, different than what she grew up in. This is an incredible step of faith because Ruth is an incredible woman of faith. And I want you to see that because I want you to understand this. Our Father in heaven loves faith. He loves to bless faith. He would love to bless your faith. And so I want you to just hang on to that idea. And I want you to think about Ruth because she is a powerful woman. Now, let's keep going. Verse 18, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. Okay, I'm going to quit trying to talk you out of it. So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is this really Naomi, the women asked? Now, you know this. Their tongues were wagging. Like you thought gossip is bad in Southport. Right here, man, this is like, wow, look at Naomi. She sure has aged, Who is that woman with her? Is that a Moabite? Wonder what her story is. All the women were just talking. And men were no better. Like, the men were sitting around the barbershop going, I told Elimelech not to head down there to Moab. Those people are crazy. They probably killed him and his sons. It's like, they're just talking, man. They're just talking about him. And then listen to Naomi. It's so sad. Don't call me Naomi, she responded. Instead, call me Mara, means bitter. For the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me? She gave herself a new name. She went from sweet to bitter. And she wasn't shy about whose fault it was either, was she? I mean, in two short verses, basically, she blamed God 4 different times. She said, this is the Almighty's fault. This is God's fault. This is God's doing. Which brings us to a point that I think is really important. Actually, 2 points. I want to kind of bring the plane in for a landing today. I want to give you a couple of things. What do we do when we find ourselves like this? What do we do when we find ourselves in the place of Naomi, where there are broken dreams, where there are prayers that didn't get answered the way we asked God to answer them, where there's a bitterness of the soul. You know what I'm talking about? Like your soul is just empty. Like, where are you, God, in all this? What do we do? I titled the sermon, Starting Over After Tragedy. How do we do that? How do we start over after tragedy in our lives? I want to give you a couple things. If you're taking notes, I hope you'll jot them down because you may not be here today, but you'll be here eventually because you're a human being living on this planet that's broken by sin. Number 1, cry out to God. Cry out to God. Now, we can read Naomi's words and dismiss her as like she's just a bitter old woman. But I think there's more to her than that. She has something powerful about her that I think is absolutely essential when you're going through pain, when you're going through loss, when you're going through disappointment, in your prayers or whatever. She trusted in the sovereignty of God. She believed. Now, she may not have liked it. She may have felt like God was unfair, that she doubted the goodness of God, but she didn't doubt his sovereignty, that God is in absolute control of my circumstances. He's in absolute control of everything. That is essential when you're going through pain. Sherry Rochford, who volunteers at Generations Church, been coming here for many years. Many years ago, she lost her daughter Diana in a car accident. Diana was a young woman, died in a car accident, and Sherry, in her own pain, in her own loss, She's helped so many people through the years deal with their pain. But I had a conversation with her several years ago about that time in her life. And she said that her counselor gave her some really good advice at one point and basically gave her permission to be angry at God. And he said this: better an angry relationship with God than none at all. Better an honest conversation with God than to completely ignore him. So I think when we find ourselves going through a season like Naomi, for a while, honestly, you're just kind of numb and don't feel anything. But I think eventually, as you get through, you don't ever get through certain things, but as you move through life, you come to a place where you have to make a decision. Am I going to stay angry at God? Am I going to ignore God forever? Or am I going to say, okay, God may have something here that I don't understand. And I'm going to cry out to him. Even if it's an angry cry, at least I'm not going to walk away from him. I'm not going to ignore him. I'm going to cry out. I'm going to be honest with God. Sherry said, at some point I realized it wasn't about me. God wanted my daughter to be home with him in heaven. It was bigger than my plans. God had something bigger than what I can see. And so ultimately, she trusted the Lord with that. I've been reading the Psalms in my quiet time over the last, month or so. And, rereading them. I love the Psalms. They just teach us how to worship, teach us how to praise. But about a third of the Psalms are what you could call lament Psalms. They're just Psalms where the author, David sometimes, other times it's anonymous. We don't know the author. But it's God giving us permission to be honest with him. Because the psalmist is just crying out to God. And they're just they're not these formal King James, thou shalt, no. They're like honest prayers where they're just saying, Lord, help me right now. I don't, and like the verbiage changes, but it's the same basic refrain. Lord, I need your wisdom in this crisis. Lord, I need your presence in this pain. Lord, I need your help, forgiveness for my sin. It's crying out to God. And that's God just giving you permission to do that. And I'd like to submit to you that maybe part of the reason you're going through what you're going through is because God just wants to have a relationship with you. And the only way you're going to talk to him is because you really need him. And maybe you've ignored him for years, and it's time for you to call upon him and be honest with him and cry out to God. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is this: stare at his blessings and not our expectations. We don't know who wrote Ruth, possibly Samuel, but whoever wrote it, they are the master of foreshadowing, because there's this subtle hint that we get to in verse 22. It's the last verse in the chapter. I hadn't read it yet, but it is so good. He says, so Naomi returned from Moab. It's kind of a summation here, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest. A little bit of foreshadowing there. Late spring's a good time. Weather's getting warm. The crops are coming in. Something good's about to happen. Naomi, as I said, renamed herself from, sweet to bitter. But it's funny because no one else in the book did. You read the rest of Ruth and no one else called her Mara. They called her Naomi. Because we have this little hint in this last verse that good things are to come. And they are. Good things are coming. We named the series that. Good things are on the way. Because in the midst of Naomi's pain and confusion and sorrow, we have this verse that reminds us God is with her. In this case, God's with her in the form of a 5'2", I don't know how tall she was, 5'4" Moabite woman named Ruth. God is in Ruth. He's with Naomi through her daughter-in-law. And through Ruth, God's going to bring blessings. He's going to change her name from Mara back to Naomi, to sweetness, because God's going to bring blessings. And we see it. They come in the middle of the barley harvest. So she doesn't know it yet because she's still staring at what she lost. But God's got something powerful for her. I've talked to a lot of people through the years who are mad at God, are bitter toward God, and I get it. I have been there. When you lose something, when you have a broken dream, and you're so like, God, what in the world are you doing? But I'd like to say something to you today, just in closing. If you're willing to receive it, I'd like to humbly and gently remind you that the breath that's flowing through your lungs right now and is flowing through your nostrils is a gift from the God that you're mad at. And the ability to process this sermon, this cognitive ability that you have right now to think and to listen and to process this, that ability, I don't want to take that for granted. That is a gift from the God that you've ignored. And the food in your stomach and your family and your kids and the car you drove into church and all, the millions of blessings that God gives us every day are gifts from our Father in heaven who loves us. And listen to me, the single greatest gift that he ever gave us was when he sent his son 2,000 years ago to be born in a stable in Bethlehem as a gift to you and I, so that Jesus could live a perfect life, die on the cross for our sins, and rise from the dead. So that if we place our faith and our trust in him, we get to be with God forever. God did that because he loves us. He doesn't just love us. He doesn't just love you. He likes you. He wants you to be with him forever. And that's why God did it. That's why he sent his son. He's given us way more than he's taken from us. If we'll take the time to stare at that instead of what we've been staring at. And check this out. This is so cool. We'll get into this more in the coming weeks. But Naomi, through the blessings that are going to come, and I'm not going to give away the end of the book. You got to come back next week. But I'm just going to give you a 30,000-foot view, okay? Naomi will become the great-great-grandmother of King David. And King David will become the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of that baby born in Bethlehem. All this pain, all this tragedy would lead to God's salvation of the world. I don't know what the reason that God brought this pain in your life, but I can tell you this, God has a purpose and a plan for it. God is sovereign over all the affairs of the world, including the circumstances of your life. And God wants to use that pain to be a blessing to you and to other people around you. And we want to help you at Generations Church to take your next step. That's our mission. If we can do that, if you'd like to join a small group, you have questions about your salvation, giving your life to Christ, whatever question, whatever we can do to help you, have a prayer request, text 94,000 and the word GC Connect. Would you bow your heads with me and close your eyes? I want us just to do that right now. I just want us to commit this to the Lord. Maybe for you, it's trusting Jesus Christ for the very first time. You saw some people get baptized last week. You heard about it. You're like, man, they're all in. I want to be all in too. I want to give my life to Christ. As I pray, I want to invite you to just say that prayer to the Lord, to invite Jesus to come into your heart. Maybe you want to be baptized, join a small group, whatever. Just talk to the Lord about that right now. Be honest with your Father in heaven who loves you. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you that you keep reminding us that the best is yet to come. That through your word, through your Holy Spirit, through circumstances, God, that you bring hope into our life. And I pray for my friends who are here today, who walked in this building, who are watching online, and there is a burden that's weighing them down. Their mind is foggy. There's an emptiness in their soul. And they're just wondering, God, what in the world you're doing? I pray, Lord, for an extra measure of grace for them. I pray, God, that you'd wrap your arms of love around them and remind them of who you are and of what you've given them. And Lord, through the fog, I pray that you give them the power to overcome. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you'll